The first thing I saw when I opened my bedroom door was a stack of envelopes arranged carefully across my bed, each one bearing my name in the same familiar handwriting I had watched for nearly 3 years on grocery lists, rent reminders, and small notes stuck to the refrigerator. But these were not ordinary messages. Some of the envelopes looked new, while others were worn at the corners, as if they had been opened, reread, and hidden away countless times. Sunlight poured through the curtains, falling across them like a spotlight, and for several long seconds I simply stood there with my suitcase still in my hand, unable to breathe. I had come home 17 days early because I believed surprising my roommate would be a kind thing. Instead, it felt as though I had walked into the middle of a secret that had been waiting for me long before I knew it existed. Before we continue, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to tell someone what your heart has been hiding. My name is Corbin Hale, and until that afternoon, I had always considered myself a practical man. I was 34, worked as a freelance sound engineer, and spent several months each year traveling with small film crews and documentary teams. My life was organized into schedules, airport gates, equipment cases, and carefully negotiated contracts. I had learned to keep my emotions packed away almost as neatly as my cables. That habit had not formed by accident. 5 years earlier, I had been engaged to a woman who disappeared from my life with almost no warning, leaving behind a brief message that explained she had fallen in love with somebody else. Since then, I had trusted routine more than people. Routine did not lie. Routine did not change its mind. Routine did not look into your eyes and promise forever before quietly choosing someone else. My roommate, Rowan, had entered my life during a housing crisis rather than a romantic one. A mutual friend introduced us when the rent on my apartment became too expensive to manage alone. Rowan was 29 then, a children's book illustrator with a talent for turning ordinary things into something warm and magical. She painted at the dining table, drank tea from mismatched cups, and had a habit of rescuing dying plants from grocery stores because she said abandoned things deserved another chance. She was the opposite of me in almost every visible way. Where I planned, she improvised. Where I avoided emotional conversations, she seemed to notice every change in a person's voice. Yet living together had been surprisingly easy. She respected silence, paid her share on time, and somehow understood when I needed company without forcing me to ask for it. Over the years, our lives became quietly connected. We ate breakfast together when our schedules allowed. She remembered which days I had difficult meetings and left coffee waiting for me. I repaired her old desk when one of the legs cracked. She came with me to the hospital when my father suffered a minor stroke, sitting beside me in the bright waiting room for 7 hours without complaining once. When she lost her largest publishing contract, I found her sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by unfinished sketches, and instead of offering advice, I sat beside her until the sunlight moved across the tiles and she finally began to talk. Neither of us called those moments love. We called them friendship, convenience, loyalty, or simply what good roommates did for each other. Looking back, I think we were both afraid of naming something that might disappear the moment it became real. 3 weeks before I found the letters, I had left for a project in northern Spain. The documentary was supposed to take 5 weeks, but a financing problem forced production to shut down early. My employer booked my return flight without much warning, and I decided not to tell Rowan. I imagined walking into the apartment in the late morning, finding her painting near the window, and watching her face light up in surprise. During the flight home, I even bought her a small handmade music box from the airport because she had once mentioned that her grandmother owned one just like it. I thought I was returning with a thoughtful gift. I did not know I was returning to the truth. The apartment was unusually quiet when I arrived shortly after noon. Rowan's shoes were near the door, but she was nowhere inside. Her canvas bag was missing from the hook, so I assumed she had gone to the art supply store or the cafe where she sometimes worked. I placed my suitcase in the hallway, carried the music box toward my bedroom, and opened the door. That was when I saw the envelopes. There were 26 of them. The first was dated nearly 2 years earlier. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I knew immediately that I should not read it. Even though my name was written on the front, the letter had clearly not been delivered in the normal way. There was no stamp, no address, and no indication that she had ever intended for me to find it that day. But they were spread across my bed in careful order, and in the center rested one larger envelope with a note on top that said, "For when I am brave enough, or when it is already too late." That sentence broke whatever restraint I had left. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the oldest envelope. Rowan had written it after the night we waited at the hospital during my father's stroke. She described watching me pretend not to be afraid, watching me stare at the emergency room doors as though sheer concentration could protect the man behind them. She wrote that she wanted to hold my hand but did not because she understood how fiercely I guarded every vulnerable part of yourself. She said that when my father finally came out safely, the relief on my face made her realize she cared about my happiness in a way that frightened her. The second letter was written months later, after her publishing contract ended. She explained that sitting beside me on the kitchen floor was the first time in years she had felt safe while failing. She wrote that I had given her something more valuable than encouragement. I had given her permission to be broken without making her feel weak. Letter after letter carried memories I had almost forgotten. A rainy morning when I gave her my jacket and walked home soaked. A birthday when I repaired an old camera that had belonged to her mother. A day when she overheard me turning down a higher-paying contract because it would have forced her to move unexpectedly. To me, those acts had been ordinary. To her, they had been evidence of a love she believed she was not allowed to confess. Some letters were hopeful. Others were filled with guilt. She repeatedly told herself that I did not feel the same way, that my kindness was simply part of my nature, and that confessing her feelings might destroy the safest home either of us had ever known. One letter, written only 6 months earlier, admitted that she had gone on 3 dates with another man because she was trying to move forward. She ended it after realizing she spent every evening comparing his laughter, patience, and small habits to mine. The final letter was dated that morning. It began with an apology. Rowan wrote that while I was away, she had accepted a job in another city. A major publisher had offered her a permanent position, an apartment stipend, and the opportunity she had worked toward for years. She was supposed to leave in 11 days. She had not told me because every time she tried, she imagined my calm response, my practical smile, and the way I would help carry her boxes without asking her to stay. She believed leaving was the only way to stop loving someone who would never love her back. She had placed the letters on my bed because she intended to gather them into a box before moving. She thought she had 17 more days before I returned. I sat there for nearly an hour while afternoon light filled the room, reading certain lines until the words blurred. My first emotion was not romance. It was grief. I grieved every moment I had misunderstood. I remembered the way her face changed whenever I spoke about future travel. I remembered how quiet she became when friends jokingly asked whether we were a couple. I remembered one winter morning when she nearly told me something important but laughed it away after I made a careless comment about never wanting another serious relationship. The painful truth was not simply that Rowan loved me. It was that part of me had known. I had recognized the warmth between us and deliberately called it friendship because friendship felt safer. I had watched her become the person I trusted most and convinced myself that trust was not love. I had built walls so carefully that I failed to notice someone gentle had been waiting outside them for years, not demanding entry, only hoping I might someday open the door. I heard the apartment lock turn shortly after 2. Rowan entered carrying rolls of packing paper and several cardboard boxes. She was humming softly until she saw my suitcase in the hallway. The sound stopped. Then she looked toward my open bedroom door and became completely still. I stepped into the hallway holding the final letter. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her face lost color. The boxes slipped from her arms and landed on the floor with a hollow sound. She looked not embarrassed but devastated, as though the one thing she had worked hardest to hide had been dragged into daylight before she was ready. She asked when I had returned. I told her less than 2 hours earlier. Her eyes moved to the letter in my hand, and she understood everything. She apologized immediately. She said the letters were never supposed to be found like this. She explained that she had been sorting her belongings that morning when a call from the publisher forced her to leave unexpectedly. She had planned to return within an hour. She believed she had enough time. Her words came quickly, but beneath them I heard years of fear. I asked whether she truly planned to leave without telling me how she felt. She looked toward the bright living room window and said she had planned to tell me about the job, but not the rest. She believed confession would only burden me. She said she had watched me rebuild myself after betrayal and knew how deeply I feared emotional dependence. She could not bear the idea of becoming another person who asked for more than I was able to give. Her answer should have relieved me. It should have made leaving simple. Instead, I felt the apartment around us becoming unfamiliar, as if every object already knew she was going. I asked her to sit with me at the dining table. For the first time since meeting her, I told her everything about the end of my engagement. Not the simplified version I had shared with friends, but the humiliating truth. I explained how my former fiancé had slowly withdrawn while I continued planning a wedding. I told Rowan that the betrayal did more than end a relationship. It damaged my faith in my own judgment. I had been convinced I understood the person beside me, and when I discovered I was wrong, I stopped trusting my ability to read love correctly. Rowan listened without interrupting. Then I admitted something even more difficult. I told her I had cared for her for a long time, but I had trained myself to translate every feeling into something safer. Missing her became habit. Protecting her became loyalty. Wanting to tell her about every important moment became friendship. I had used smaller words because love felt too dangerous to name. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not reach for me. She asked whether I was saying those things because the letters frightened me or because she was leaving. It was a fair question. I looked around the apartment at the life we had built without realizing it. 2 coffee cups drying beside the sink. Her plants leaning toward the window I repaired. My father's hospital bracelet tucked into a framed photograph she had given me. The yellow blanket she always used during rainy afternoons. Nothing about our life was dramatic, yet suddenly it appeared more precious than every grand promise I had once believed. I told her I did not know exactly what our future would look like. I could not promise that fear would disappear overnight. But I knew that the idea of helping her carry boxes into a moving truck and pretending she was only my roommate felt like another kind of betrayal, one committed against both of us. Rowan began to cry then, not loudly, but with the exhausted sadness of someone who had been strong for too long. I moved my hand across the table and placed it near hers. I did not grab her. I did not ask her to abandon the job. I simply left my hand there, giving her the choice I had denied both of us for years. After a moment, she placed her hand in mine. We sat that way while daylight moved across the room. The following days were not a perfect romantic transformation. Real lives rarely change that neatly. Rowan still wanted the job, and I refused to ask her to sacrifice an opportunity she deserved. We spent hours discussing possibilities. The new city was only 3 hours away by train. My work already required travel, and I could base many projects from anywhere. For the first time, instead of using practical concerns as a reason to retreat, we used them to build a plan. We decided she would accept the position. I would remain in the apartment for 3 months while finishing my current contracts, then move closer if our relationship continued to grow in a healthy way. We agreed not to turn years of hidden feelings into a rushed promise. Love, we realized, was not proven by dramatic sacrifice. Sometimes it was proven by patience, honesty, and the willingness to remain present when uncertainty made escape easier. On the morning she left, the sky was clear and bright. Sunlight reflected off the windows of the moving van as we carried her final boxes downstairs. The apartment felt empty, but not abandoned. Before she climbed into the passenger seat, I gave her the small music box I had bought at the airport. She opened it, and the fragile melody floated through the daytime traffic. She smiled through tears and told me she had spent years writing letters because she believed written words were safer than spoken ones. I gave her a new envelope. Inside was the first love letter I had ever written. It was only 1 page long. I told her that I could not change the years we had wasted being afraid, but I could choose not to waste the next day. I wrote that she had taught me love did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it watered forgotten plants, waited in hospital corridors, saved the last cup of coffee, and stayed beside you until you finally became brave enough to recognize home. Over the next year, we traveled between cities, missed trains, argued about schedules, and learned how difficult honest love could be. There were days when my old fears returned. There were moments when a low and worried distance would prove she had been foolish to hope. But instead of hiding, we spoke. Instead of writing letters we never intended to send, we gave them to each other. 11 months after she left, I moved into a small apartment near her new studio. We did not call it a perfect ending because it was not an ending. It was a beginning built from truth. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be afraid to speak their feelings, subscribe to Ancient Truth, and tell us in the comments whether you believe love can survive years of silence. And before this story ends, please comment the words, "Courage opens closed doors," as a reminder that some of the most beautiful changes in life begin when fear finally loses its voice. Years later, Rowan kept all 26 letters in a wooden box beside our wedding photograph. Next to them rested the single letter I gave her on the day she moved away. Whenever life became difficult, we sometimes opened that box and remembered how close we came to losing each other, not because love was absent, but because fear had convinced us silence was safer. I had come home 17 days early expecting to surprise my roommate. Instead, I discovered that home had been loving me quietly for years. And sometimes, the truth arrives before we are ready, not to destroy the life we know, but to finally show us the life we were too afraid to choose.